I started subletting a rental cabin for a couple of months back in 2023 after things got heated between me and my dad, and I needed to get out of the house for a while. The person who was actually on the lease was dealing with some personal issues of his own that forced him to leave, so I'll just refer to him as my landlord to keep things simple. The cabin was a full unit rental on a month-to-month basis, which was perfect for my temporary situation. It was technically 2 floors with a small kitchen, a decent-sized living area, and 1 bedroom that you accessed by climbing a short staircase. There was also this quirky hatch-style door in the floor that you had to lift open to get up to the bedroom. By the time this happened, I had already been there a full month and had already paid for the second month, so I was fully settled in. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road alongside a few other similarly sized cabin-style homes. One of them appeared to be vacant as far as I could tell, since I never saw a car out front or lights on inside. The other houses I knew had people living in them, though I had never actually met any of the neighbors. I work 12-hour shifts sometimes, and on those nights when I get home I am completely drained and basically go straight to bed and watch TV until I fall asleep. This was one of those nights. I got home, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a protein shake as my late-night dinner, and headed up to bed. I always close the hatch door at night. There is something about having an open entrance to your bedroom that makes me feel exposed and vulnerable, even if it is just a door in the floor. This one didn't have a lock, but I still closed it out of habit. I was lying in bed watching TV when I heard it. A voice from somewhere below saying, "Who's up there?" My heart stopped for a split second. I shot up to a sitting position. It sounded like it came from inside the house, though part of me wanted to believe it might have been from outside. I grabbed the remote and turned the TV off. I crawled over to peek out the small circular window above the bed. I didn't see anyone out there, but it was also extremely dark. I called out asking who was there. The silence that followed was deafening. I got off the bed and put my hand on the hatch handle. I lifted it and looked down the staircase. I actually called out my dad's name, half hoping maybe he had stopped by. No response. I went downstairs, scared out of my mind, and flipped on the first light switch I passed. The living room lit up just as I expected it to. In the back of my mind, I was still trying to convince myself this was someone outside. I turned on the front porch light and checked through the windows. Nobody out there. I was genuinely confused at this point. I turned the living room light back off, went back upstairs, and shut the hatch door behind me. I was pretty wide awake now, so I flipped the TV back on. Not even 5 minutes later, there was pounding on the hatch door from below. It was forceful, almost aggressive, like it was meant to frighten me. If there had been any doubt before, that erased it completely. Someone was inside the house. I left the TV on and stayed completely still, because I was honestly too scared to move a single inch. The most terrifying part of the whole thing was that whoever was down there could open that door at any moment since there was no lock on it. I lay there frozen for about 20 minutes. When I finally felt calm enough to move, I reached for my phone. It wasn't on the nightstand. I looked around and couldn't find it anywhere. I must have left it downstairs. I lifted the hatch and looked down the staircase. With the flickering light from the TV, I could just barely make out the bottom of the stairs and part of the living room. I crept down quietly, and when I hit the bottom, I didn't stop to turn on any lights. I bolted straight out the back door in bare feet and ran to the nearest neighbor's house where I knew people were home because the lights were on. I knocked repeatedly on the door. Then I noticed someone standing at the window beside the door, just watching me. I had no idea how long they had been standing there looking at me. I pressed my face toward the glass and explained through it that I was their neighbor, that something was wrong, and that I needed to borrow a phone to call the police. He clearly heard me. He just stared. No reaction, no movement, just this unnerving blank stare. I started slowly backing away as it dawned on me that he wasn't going to respond at all. I looked down the road, and there were no other houses with lights on anywhere in sight. And then a thought crept in that I couldn't shake. What if this neighbor had something to do with it? I went back to my cabin through the back door, which was pulled shut exactly the way I had left it. I went inside and locked it behind me, then turned on every single light in the place. I searched the whole cabin, looking for both an intruder and my phone. I eventually thought to check my car and found my phone sitting right in the center console. I had been so exhausted when I got home that I had completely forgotten it in there. I went back inside and locked up again. The TV was still going upstairs. I climbed the steps, lifted the hatch, and when I got to the top, I saw a man sitting on my bed staring at the screen. I screamed. He turned his head slowly and looked at me, Before I could register anything else, I was already back down the stairs and out the door with my phone in hand, calling 911. I sat in my locked car watching the house while I stayed on the line with the operator. At some point, I saw a figure moving through the backyard and disappearing into the woods behind the property. I told the operator as it was happening. When a patrol car arrived, the officer went through the house and checked the upstairs room. After I explained that I had seen someone likely walking away into the woods, he asked whether I had somewhere else I could stay for the night. I swallowed my pride and called my dad. I packed up the essentials and went back to his place. I returned to the cabin the next day, stayed one more night, then came back and collected the rest of my things. My landlord was decent enough to refund a portion of my rent. When I described what the man looked like, he went completely quiet and didn't ask any follow-up questions after that, which I found pretty strange. Looking back at the whole situation, something never sat right with me. The creepy neighbor who just stared through the glass and said nothing. The landlord's sudden and unexplained urgency to vacate the place. And then someone breaking into the cabin. Whether any of it was connected or whether I'm reading too much into it, I honestly still don't know. It was a Tuesday night around 11 in the evening back in 2013, and I was walking home from work down a dimly lit street. My car had been in the shop, so I had been making the 3-mile walk home every day. It was barely an hour on foot, so I was always back before midnight. I live in a small town in southern Indiana, and after 10 at night, there is rarely any traffic on the roads. The only vehicles you tend to see out that late are truckers heading toward Indianapolis. I was about a mile into the walk when I turned onto a dirt road. My house was off the beaten path, so getting there required cutting through a stretch of dirt roads surrounded by forest on both sides. As I made the turn, I heard the sound of a motor somewhere in the distance, and it was getting closer, very slowly. Looking back down the main road I had just turned off of, I could make out a van about a quarter mile away, crawling along without its headlights on. At first that didn't really alarm me, because the town I live in has a cheap used car dealership that regularly sells vehicles with broken parts, broken headlights included. I just assumed it was probably one of their customers. I kept walking down the side road, while the van continued its slow crawl along the main stretch. About 5 seconds later, I jumped at the sound of the engine suddenly roaring as the van accelerated hard, and now it had its lights on. I was startled but still not particularly worried, at least not until the van got close to my turn. About 500 feet before the intersection, the van killed its lights again and slowed back down to a crawl. That's when I officially got creeped out. I didn't want to appear rattled, so I just picked up my pace and kept moving, glancing back over my shoulder every few seconds to see if I was being followed. Then my suspicions became reality. I looked back and saw the van turn onto the dirt road behind me. I was only about 500 feet ahead of it at that point, so I started walking even faster. I didn't want to look back again, but I did anyway just to get a read on the situation, and what I saw frightened me to my core. The van had stopped in the road, and both the passenger and driver side doors were hanging wide open. I ran. As fast as I could, I bolted down that dirt road. Then I heard what I am completely certain was a gunshot somewhere not far behind me, and in that moment I genuinely thought I was going to die. I veered hard off the road and dove into the surrounding forest, finding a large rock and pressing myself behind it. I heard what sounded like a middle-aged man's voice not far away saying he thought I had gone into the woods. Then, to my absolute horror, I heard what sounded like 3 young girls, with one of them responding, "Okay, sir, I'll see if we can find her." At that point, I wasn't just fearing for my life anymore. I was terrified of being pulled into whatever this was. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying not to make a single sound. Then I heard the man say that whoever found me wouldn't have to drink the blood tonight. My mind was racing. Was this some kind of satanic cult? Were these girls being held against their will? Was I about to become one of them? I stayed crouched behind that rock for what felt like forever, flinching at every sound around me. Then, to my enormous relief, I heard sirens nearby. I stayed put a little longer just to be sure. When I finally found the nerve to peek out from behind the rock, I could see red and blue lights flashing just beyond the tree line. I ran out of the woods screaming for help. The officers came toward me, and one of them asked if I knew anything about a body. I had no idea what he was talking about. Then I looked toward the front of the patrol car and saw the most disturbing thing I have ever witnessed in my life. It was what appeared to be a young woman, naked, gutted, with blood everywhere. The van was nowhere to be seen. I told the officers everything. The van, the man's voice, the girls, the comment about drinking blood. They said they would look into it, and were kind enough to drive me home that night since there was no way I was walking anywhere alone. I couldn't sleep. At some point I got up and looked out my window, and there it was. The same van from before, rolling slowly down my street with no headlights on. This time I had the presence of mind to grab a pen and write down the license plate number. I called the police immediately and gave them everything. As expected, by the time officers arrived the van was long gone. But what they told me next is something that has stayed with me ever since. They said they had run the plate, and it came back registered in South Dakota. But when they cross-referenced it with other precincts around the country, they found that the same license plate number had been reported on a suspicious van that same night in Vermont, Nevada, Alaska, and Texas. They told me they would contact me if anything further developed. I never got that call. I don't put much stock in the paranormal, so my best guess has always been that this was some kind of organized cult operating across the country, using cloned or fake license plates to cover their tracks. But the honest truth is I will never know for certain. I don't live in Indiana anymore, and from that night forward, the moment something feels off, I don't hesitate. I leave. My wife and I live in a normal suburb. We have normal jobs, normal lives, next to normal neighbors. We live the, I guess you'd say, standard American lifestyle that most of us are taught by our parents to achieve. Me sitting down to write this story is already saying something, because I'm not a writer. The last time I typed something out this long was the last paper I wrote in college, but something happened not that long ago that no one can explain, and it still scares us to this day. My wife Gianna and I had a normal day, and after work we decided to go out to eat for a change. And we got back around 9 o'clock. We don't stay up very late on work nights. So by 9:30 we were brushing our teeth getting ready for bed. By 10 o'clock we were in bed. And we usually shut the lights off at 11 o'clock. We either read our books or watch our show. Tonight, we were watching our show. Then the phone rang. Gi told me not to answer it. Anyone calling at this hour can't be good news. I agreed with her, but for that reason I said I should pick it up in case it's an emergency. So I reached over for the phone next to the bed to pick it up. But it stopped ringing before I could actually lift the receiver. That old landline was trashed. The second the call stopped, the caller ID would disappear, and there wasn't a way to check the call history. Oh well, wrong number. But a few minutes later the phone rang again. So I grabbed the phone and looked at the screen. It said unknown number. Gianna and Andy both thought that was unusual, especially past 10 o'clock. I feel that there's a generally accepted cutoff time for phone calls, and that's after 9:00 p.m. I didn't pick up the phone, but right after it stopped ringing the phone rang again. Suddenly it felt like it was an emergency, like God forbid something happened to a relative. So I picked up in a hurry. On the other end it was the voice of my neighbor. He asked me if I knew that man standing out in front of my house. I said, "What are you talking about?" He told me to go outside, and hung up. I found it insanely bizarre the way he'd just hang up abruptly like Thadjian's face when I told her what I'll just said was a look of fear. She said, "Don't go out there." I said, "I'm just going to look out the window." I went downstairs and moved the curtain a bit to look out to the front lawn. There was definitely no one standing outside. I opened the front door, and then the storm door, and stepped out to the front stoop. I looked around and looked into the bushes right in front of the house. Nobody. So I got a little annoyed at the idea that Al would prank call us this late on a work night, and also just felt a little out of character for him to do that. I went back to bed and told Gianna that no one was out there, and Al was probably messing with us. She was just as confused by that as I was. It just felt bizarre. She told me to call him, and so I did, but it rang and went straight to voicemail. So I left a voicemail saying, "Hey Al, what was that call about? Give me a call back." Then the phone rang. It said unknown caller again. I picked up, and it was Al again saying, before I could even say anything, "Go outside, there's someone standing outside your house." He said it in a calm, slow voice. Then he hung up. I got up and said out loud, "All right, what the hell is going on?" I told Gianna to wait here. I went downstairs and back to the window, a look through the curtain, and this time I saw someone standing right at the end of our walkway, where it met the sidewalk. He had a hood over his head, effectively covering his face to just blackness. I was honestly shaken. I opened my door and said, "Outside, can I help you?" The man just stood in place. I threatened him with calling the police. Then the house phone rang again. I closed the front door and went to the kitchen phone, and this time noticed the caller ID showed my neighbor Al's number. I picked up, and Al said in a much more normal voice, "Hey, I just got your voicemail. What was that about? I didn't call you." I was so confused I swore to him. He just called me twice telling me about a man outside my house. He sounded even more confused than me. Then moments later said, he doesn't see anyone. Outside my house, I went back out to look out the window, and that man who was standing outside my house was gone. I demanded, "All tell me right now if this was a joke. And if I found out it wasn't, he wouldn't tell me we'd have a problem." Al claimed he was telling the truth. And he's not some immature prankster kind of guy. He's a very low-key, respectful person. I had to put him on speaker, so GI could vouch for me that I wasn't going crazy and that we did in fact get 2 calls from someone who sounded just like him. He did the same and put his wife on the phone as well to vouch for him in the end. What could he really say, though, except for it sounds like someone was pranking us. Eventually we got off the phone, but he was no less horrified than I was before. I had to go back downstairs one more time to hang up the downstairs phone. And so I looked outside one more time. The man was still no longer there. None of us could ever figure out this unexplainable situation.